It's difficult for me to imagine, like, if I saw a black character that was race swapped in a show and it wasn't done well, I can't imagine going from that to like, I don't know about black people. I haven't seen a lot of strong, compelling evidence that deliberate efforts at representation is hurting art.
Yeah, but I mean, you're diving into like the details of representation. I'm not sure that has to do with the definition of woke.
Isn't it intertwined with like the term woke?
Well, I thought it was weird because you had like the little cry face on my avatar, and I'm like, I'm over here as the person who says that I won't vote for Trump on principle.
Look, I'm going to vote for Trump on principle that it's going to make...
Really? Okay.
Yeah, on the principle that it's going to make Hutch cry.
Friends, if you want to help with some algorithm love, click like, comment down below. I love you guys, everybody who's doing that. Appreciate it. We're doing an impromptu conversation with Sitch and Adam because they wanted to talk to me about wokeness. What did he say? He said, getting your understanding of what woke is would be interesting. Sitch and I both use different definitions. We'll see if we start screaming at each other and calling each other. So I hope it doesn't turn to that.
So we're going to talk about wokeism, right? We talked about this yesterday, you and I, Adam.
We did, yes.
Yeah.
So, but we thought we would invite Hutch in, you know, someone who's obviously in the progressive bubble, doesn't really think much, you know.
Fair.
Usually votes just based on what the Democrat Party tells him to vote for.
Mm-hmm.
Did you used to be...
Look, I try to get Hutch to be nice to me, and now I'm being mean. You know I'm joking, you're being right, Hutch.
It's all good. All good. Okay. I can take it.
Did you used to be on the right, Hutch, or am I thinking of someone else?
No, I think that was Destiny. I was apolitical until I was probably 19, and then I took some courses in college, started learning about history, and that's when I started to shift left.
Maybe I'm thinking about Pondering. Didn't he used to be on the right?
I think so, maybe.
Okay.
Was he? That's news to me. I know Destiny was. Destiny was a bit of a libertarian.
Well, I know Destiny was, yeah. I'm pretty sure Pondering used to be a dirty anti-SJW and then changed at some point. But anyway.
No, that can't be true. I'm going to message him.
Ask him about it.
No way that's true.
He told us. He told it to us, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to text him now.
I just revealed the dirty secret. Okay, so how should we start this? Should we start with your tweet, Adam, or should we just ask Hutch what he thinks?
No, we should start. Look, I want Hutch to define wokeness. Obviously, everybody has like different definitions of wokeness, so...
Well, yeah, no, I feel like maybe Sitch, you and I had an exchange about this at one point on Twitter. I think there's...
Sitch and I have kind of different definitions of wokeness, so we don't necessarily agree, but...
Yeah, mine's right.
Well, look, yours is technically right, but there's two aspects of wokeness, and I think one takes supremacy over the other. So
right.
So what is wokeness to you, Hutch?
Well, I think you're right that there's different definitions of it. I feel like colloquially, the most prolific understanding of the term is kind of nebulous to me. Maybe you guys can give me some clarification, but for example, like Asmongold was watching the Ghosts of Tsushima trailer, the sequel trailer, and it was revealed that the protagonist was a woman. And then you look in his chat and people are just spamming the word the term DEI. Like, I feel like that's the most, in a very broad sense, like woman minority, especially woman minority, especially queer woman minority, especially disabled woman, queer minority.
Person, a queer woman, or disabled?
What do all those groups have in common, Hutch?
I think it would be like what lefties would call like marginalized, or is that what you're going with?
There you go.
Yeah.
We're making progress here.
So to me, it seems like for a lot of sort of reactionary young men on the internet, woke equals like minority or woman. But you can also go down the road of there is a more esoteric kind of like understanding of the word, which originates in academia. And I feel like Sitch, that's the one that you go with, right? Like, how do you define?
That's the one I go with. Yeah, but before we get to that though, because I want this ghost.
Mine is all over academia too.
The Ghost of Tsushima thing. Why do you think the chat was saying DEI in response to seeing the trailer?
It was as soon as it was revealed that the protagonist is a woman. Because I
understand, but like, what do you think their thought process is?
I think they've been primed to have that reaction when they see like a female protagonist now. Even though we've had female protagonists in old games, Lara Croft, etc. I think it's just dialed up to 11 in the last especially in the last like 1 to 2 years, 3 years maybe.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, why do you think it bothers them?
I don't know if I presume to like understand their psyche. Like, I think for some of them it comes from like something that you could call bigotry, and I think for others it's like a cultural thing now. So I don't know.
These
like,
are your ideological opponents, Hutch. Why would you not want to know what their psyche is? Don't you think you should know your adversary? Like,
no, I mean,
how
I
they
am
think?
curious. I do want to know. I don't know if a lot of them themselves understand why they're upset. Because in the case of the sequel of Ghost of Tsushima, it's a totally different story. It's not like they took the same character and then gender swapped it. It's a totally different story on a totally different island on a totally different timeline. And so there's no reason why having a woman protagonist would be necessarily like problematic in the way that some people would think that like gender swapping would be.
Well, I mean, I feel like they're telling you when they say DEI, that means something, right? It means that they feel like someone, I mean, they feel like someone has been race swapped or gender swapped or is occupying a position, not because someone believes that it is through merit. Obviously, we're talking about a story, so through the best storytelling, but because it's trying to appeal to a specific political demographic.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that was probably the perception they had. I don't think it's well founded in this case. Would you agree that?
I don't know. We haven't played the game yet, but.
Well, I mean, just on its face, though, it's a totally different character. It's a totally different setting. It's a totally different timeline. So they didn't swap anything. They're just telling a new story.
It's not a question of swapping. It's kind of like with the Assassin's Creed thing, when people see the Black Samurai and they automatically assume, oh, well, this is done not because the writers think they can tell the best story possible about Japan using a Black Samurai. They think it's because they're trying to appeal to a woke political demographic.
You just subscribe.
Well, I guess like I think it would be worthwhile for us to establish a baseline. Do you guys think that it is an acceptable or maybe that's not the right word, but do you think that we'll just say acceptable. Do you think it's an acceptable goal for somebody who produces media, whether it be TV or games or TV or film? Do you think it's acceptable for people to intentionally pursue a diverse cast?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, of course.
I'm aware of that. I think everyone needs
should be aware of.
No,
go ahead. They should be aware of tokenism. Tokenism is what I would avoid. So
how do you, so for example, did you guys watch like the Last of Us show on HBO?
No.
There was a whole episode that was centered on characters that were largely unexplored in the game, but it was a gay couple, and the entire episode was devoted to them. And it was probably like one of the best representations of like a gay love story that I've ever seen. You could have swapped out either character as a woman and the story would have worked identically. Like there was no sort of like it wasn't like a self-celebratory kind of thing. It wasn't like it came across as very authentic, and that made a lot of people upset. A lot of people seem to think that it's not a worthwhile goal or it's not an acceptable goal to intentionally pursue diverse characters, and they will call any kind of like inclusion of a minority character, they'll call that token. You mentioned a token character, or tokenizing.
Yeah, but you know what tokenism is, right? When you're basically using somebody of a marginalized community as a shield against your project, which is not good for the marginalized community. Obviously, if you pick somebody that is a terrible actor to represent a community, like that's going to show, right? People are going to see that person is a terrible actor, and it could create a negative stereotype about that community, that everyone in that community is a terrible actor, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think like you just want whatever story you tell, you just want it to feel like an authentic story, I think. As long as it does that, then it's fine. Of course you do. Well, like, what kind of examples of tokenism would you guys give?
Well, wait, before I wanted to talk about the Last of Us thing for a second.
Oh, go ahead.
I mean, I haven't seen it, so I can't. I don't have a judgment on that specific episode. But I think what happens in these situations is it's the same thing that happens with like affirmative action, which is that, if someone perceives that there's affirmative action in a college or a job or something, it puts this negative stereotype in their mind where they'll see like someone, who's black or a minority and they go, oh, well, they only got this job, for affirmative action policies, not because they actually deserve to be here. It kind of puts people in that like negative headspace. And I think it's the same thing with like The Last of Us or these other shows, is that too many people have been primed when they see a gay couple or a non-white couple or something to assume that, well, they didn't put those people in there because it's the best for the story or it's the best writing or whatever. The assumption is that those people are put in there for a political purpose. And that's sort of the danger, I think, with having, this like sort of like, we need to shove diversity into everything, is it makes half the population too cynical when they see like a diverse cast, as opposed to just being like, oh, like when Samuel Jackson was Luke, or was decided to be Luke Fury, like way back in the day, there wasn't really a bunch of people going like, oh my God, they just put Samuel Jackson there for like woke DI reasons. Like no one thought that. They just thought like, oh, Samuel Jackson's is a badass. It makes sense to make him like this badass character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I necessarily agree with you in principle. I think like, I'm curious about what are some of your examples of this happening? Like when has there been a character inserted that they weren't like a worthy character or they weren't like a worthy actor? Because I think where my mind goes, and I hear people kind of say the same thing about like Ketanji Brown Jackson and Kamala Harris. They call them both DEI hires, and so my mind goes to the idea that it's insane to me that people don't assume that there isn't a large pool of talented, super qualified Black women that can fill particular roles. Do you know what I mean? Like instead they go to, oh, a qualified white person was passed up so that they could have this role, which is just a completely, wait, you're laughing? What's up, buddy?
Me? I'm laughing at the chat.
Oh, okay.
I really wasn't even paying attention to you, but
I'm listening.
Okay. All right, Sitch. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, no, but this is the problem with, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is a problem when you have a sort of affirmative action policy where you put out there prescriptively or before the project is even started that we're going to intentionally do something for diversity's sake, is it makes people become cynical or skeptical of why people are hired for certain positions.
Why is that a problem though? I haven't really heard that articulated yet.
Why is that if it ruins the story or makes the story lesser or lame? Well, it's two problems. Number one, does it make the product or the story weaker? Number one. And then number two, even if it doesn't, people just don't like that. They feel like the other team's politics are being sort of pushed in a media sense. So those are the two problems generally people have with it.
Yeah, I mean, I keep asking you guys for examples. So like, what would be an example? Like, 'cause to me, when this stuff like if there's some character that's inserted or whatever, a lot of the times the issue is bad writing. It's not necessarily like casting of the character or whatever. Do you have like a specific example that
you DEI reasons?
What's this now?
Well, the writer could be hired for DEI reasons as well, right? They could be they could be hired for representation. So give us some examples of bad writing, and let's look at the writers and see if they were hired for DEI reasons.
Wait, hold on. I thought you guys said a moment ago that there was nothing inherently wrong with intentionally pursuing something like representation.
As long as you're avoiding putting people into positions where they're not up to snuff, where they're going to get railed on because their acting is not good or their writing is not good, because then you're setting up that community for a negative stereotype that these people are horrible, right?
Well, isn't that what I said a moment ago? I said the problem was not like intentionally going for representation. The problem is if it's executed poorly. So if the character is bad, the character is bad. If the writing is bad, the writing is bad.
Yeah, I agree.
But you seem to agree that it's not necessarily or inherently bad to pursue representation in the writing room or in the cast, unless you guys don't mean that, or what's up with there?
I don't think it's inherently bad to seek representation as long as you still hold to meritocratic standards, because the problem comes in when the meritocratic standards go out the window, and then all of a sudden you're creating negative stereotypes of some community that you intended to represent.
What would be the negative stereotype that you would be I'm trying to, it's difficult for me to imagine, like if I saw a black character that was race swapped in a show and it wasn't done well, I can't imagine going from that to like, I don't know about black people. That seems kind of like, I feel like there was probably some latent racism there before that even happened, right?
Well, I don't know if it's going to make you think that about like, oh, I don't like black people because there's a bad black actor in some TV show. I think it's going to make a person think, oh, this is just furthers my feelings that sort of DEI is just throwing merit under the bus, and they're just getting people, you know, who are bad actors because they care about, you know, race more than the story.
Yeah, again, I mean, I would just generalize that like my issue with media that doesn't work is if it's just not executed properly. I haven't seen a lot of strong, compelling evidence to demonstrate that deliberate efforts at representation is necessarily like hurting art right now. I just don't have the same perspective. Like the recent Star Wars show was a pretty good example. Like there were like a couple.
Can we get back on to like what woke means? And I just look, a conversation about representation is not really super interesting, but
isn't it intertwined with like the term woke? It's difficult to avoid that topic.
Yeah, but I mean, you're diving into like the details of representation when I'm not sure that has to do with the definition of woke. I mean,
well, I clarified to you earlier that I think for a lot of people, in fact, I would say for most people, their definition of woke, if people unironically use that term, their definition of woke is literally just like woman, black, disabled, whatever. It's like the ability to give yourself top scars, like in the new Dragon Age or whatever. That's like enough to piss people off. They call that woke.
Have you heard the term? Go ahead, Sitch. You take
well,
over.
no, because I don't know if you wanted to talk about this, Adam, but because I'm assuming you're going to bring up the Acolyte. Do you not think that the Acolyte had like woke messaging or woke themes whatsoever in the story?
Insofar as woke equals like woman and gay, yes, it did.
So just
there were gay women in the show.
That? You don't see like beyond that?
I mean, my issue with the show is that I thought the writing was pretty boring. I mean, there was like one really cool episode, but for the story to me, it was not that compelling and the writing was not that great.
I mean,
it wasn't because they chose to put like a black lesbian in the show.
I agree, but I would say that even beyond the casting choice, just the idea that you're going to try to have like the Jedi maybe be the bad guys, and you know a group of space lesbians, you know, be like, oh, we're the victims. Like you don't think that smacks of kind of like a woke political philosophy?
I think there was a bit of nuance in the story there. I don't think that was necessarily. I mean, haven't we already explored the idea that the Jedi are fallible in previous entries? Like, wasn't that like a big part of like
fallible
episode 3?
Like, well, in the original prequels, which were also bad, by the way, you know, there was this idea that the Jedi. I guess it's hard to tell because I think the prequels are so bad that a lot of people kind of do headcanon. So I'm not sure what is what is real and what is not real. But people have sort of interpreted that the prequels are supposed to be that the Jedi have sort of grown complacent, right? But that's different than saying you've grown complacent to the Jedi are, you know, killing people and covering up crimes and hiding, like, you know, that they fucked up and maybe like did a police shooting.
Well, they explored like the Jedi's hubris in the original trilogy, and then Rian Johnson like picked up on that theme again.
Trilogy?
No, in the original, sorry, the prequel trilogy.
Yeah, okay, I was like,
and then Rian Johnson picked up on that and expanded on that in his movie. But I don't know if they took it to the extent of like where like the Jedi. I mean, the Jedi in the show didn't murder anyone in cold blood. That's not what happened, as far as I remember.
No, but
I'm a little murky on the details.
They covered up a bad police shooting.
Right.
You don't think that there was a police shooting like metaphor in the Acolyte? It seemed pretty clear to me.
I didn't pick up. Maybe I didn't pick up on that at all.
When the black lady turns into a smoke monster for no reason, and the Jedi just immediately kills her.
I did not dive into the lore of the Acolyte because I just was not that interested in the show. I just thought that the writing was not great.
It was a great show.
It was a great show. Okay, well, let's go back. Okay, so well, first of all, I disagree with how the Rian Johnson explained the hubris of the Jedi, but that's a story for another day. Let's go back. Let's circle back to wokeness here.
Yeah.
So I guess my definition, I guess we did. I totally forgot about that. I think we had some interaction on this on Twitter, is that wokeness is the concept that liberalism won't solve societal problems and that we as a society need to wake up to this fact and move to a illiberal some kind of illiberal solution. And if you're on the left, usually that solution is some form of socialism or, far left ideology. That's what wokeness is.
I can't
It's
speak
moving
to any
away
of that.
from,
I'm not.
I guess I should say it's moving away from individualism to some kind of collectivism.
Sitch, can I ask you where the oppressor-oppressed lens that the woke people constantly use fits in with your definition?
Well, they use the oppressor lens to justify moving away from individualism to collectivism. That's the justification for it.
Okay, so so I got you. The oppressor lens is what they're using, and they want to push to collectivism to kind of abolish that system, the oppressor-oppressed system.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense.
I don't disagree that there are some people that take it to that extreme. I think like the median person that was marching during the BLM protests probably had no idea what the BLM leadership, the actual organization, was up to.
Mm-hmm.
I think for 99% of the people that were marching in the streets, the catalyzing event was George Floyd, but it tapped into existing frustrations that people had based on what I would call legitimate grievances. Like, would you disagree that there are some systemic inequalities that exist in the criminal justice system?
Well, I do want to answer this. I want to come back to this legitimate grievances thing, especially with the BLM stuff.
Sure.
But would you agree? Because would you agree that whenever you have people like broadly in the political movement, that usually the overwhelming people in the political movement don't have like a strong grasp of whatever the political philosophy is that they're kind of in favor of? They're just sort of motivated by whatever the emotion is. They're swept up by that, and they're just kind of going along with something.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Like the median sort of politically engaged person is not super engaged like we are.
Right. So yeah, like the average person on the left or the right or in the BLM protests, like, yeah, they're not going to have like a deep philosophical understanding of maybe what the philosophy, the overarching philosophy of the movement is. They're going to have like their own reason for being there.
Well, I think I think you can find with any movement, you're going to see opportunists come in and try to hijack the movement for their own selfish purposes. You can see that on one extreme to the right with like white supremacists or whatever, and you can see it on another extreme with people trying to use like George Floyd to push, intersectionality and socialism, like or whatever.
The people in charge of BLM were just stealing everyone's money. So
yeah, right.
So, but no, but see, I think that's the George Floyd thing and the BLM stuff. That's a good example, sort of what I'm talking about. Is you had this narrative form that was completely untrue, that there was like this massive amount of police shooting unarmed black men, of white police officers shooting unarmed black men, and it turned out that was not even remotely true. And actually, it was less likely that a white police officer would shoot an unarmed black man than a black police officer. When what was that guy's name? Roland Fry, I think was his name, did the study, and he actually got basically shit canned for that. Mm-hmm. So
yeah,
that's the problem, is that you have a false narrative pushed, and then everyone freaks out over the George Floyd thing, and it causes massive protests, massive riots. And this is right after, like, that was even crazier, because literally right before that happened, you had a bunch of people on the right come out, and they were protesting the lockdowns, and you had the entire media apparatus calling all those protesters evil and spreading COVID. And then as soon as the BLM protests happened, which were far larger and more wide scale, suddenly all these people come out in mainstream media and say, well, it's actually okay, you're not spreading COVID because you're all outside or you're wearing masks or whatever. So it kind of just highlights the insane bias and sort of the cultural bias in the mainstream.
I mean, I don't disagree that there was a different standard applied to the BLM stuff. I would not say that they were like equivalent in terms of legitimacy of the grievance. I don't disagree with you when you make the case that there were a lot of people that were confused about how many unarmed black people were dying at the hands of police every year. I think if you polled a lot of the people that were marching in the BLM protests, the thousands all over the country, you probably would have heard people say like, thousands. So I don't disagree with you there. And there was also some confusion about like Jacob Blake in particular. He was the guy near Wisconsin, the one that that prefaced the Rittenhouse situation.
That guy 100% deserved to get shot, and the media basically lied about it.
I don't know to what extent the media did. I mean, I'm sure you're probably right that there were a lot of people on media that
the reporting was all like Jacob Blake shot in the back by the police officers, all leaving out the fact that he was getting into a car, essentially kidnapping, some women's children.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess it was like his children, but
right,
she didn't have custody of them. So
right, yeah, there was a lot of confusion about, but I would say like the BLM stuff tapped into grievances that I think are real and I think are justified. So it wasn't just the fact that there was a guy kneeing on somebody's neck for 7.5 minutes or however long it was. You also have situations that I think like most people are sort of broadly aware of, which is the fact that like black people are more likely to be pulled over in the first place. Even if you adjust for the same priors, if you compare the sentencing between a white person with low level drug offense and a black person, the black person on average is going to be sentenced longer. On average, they're not going to be able to afford as good of a lawyer. And so there's disparate outcomes there. So, you know, I don't think it's wrong to suggest that there's issues that need to be addressed. But I'm not going to disagree with you on every point you make about some people that were not honestly talking about what the issues actually were. Some people were obfuscating and making it worse.
The issue, but the problem was that, I mean, those people, you know, all the people that were kind of out there for BLM that were so energetic. First of all, I mean, obviously, I imagine a lot of that energy was because of the lockdown and people just wanted to get outside. But putting that aside, you know, I don't think the people were out there because they're like, oh, you know, I feel like there's a statistically high proportion of black males that are unfairly pulled over. They were primarily out there, and when you ask them, people would say this, and there was polling, I remember, where people would say what you were saying. People, like overwhelmingly people, especially on the left, would say that they thought that there was thousands and thousands of black men killed, every unarmed black men wrongly killed by police every year. And it was like, I don't know, it was like in the low double digits or something. I thought that year it was like 15 or something.
Yeah,
or
it's
20.
not even 20. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It was like, well, yeah, exactly. And so it was like, there's a completely false narrative that spawns this entire movement. And that was the primary thing that was getting people out there. And it just kind of shows how insane the reporting was on this and how it was just completely factually incorrect.
I mean, wouldn't you agree also that it was just the visceral nature of the videos? So like take Jacob Blake out of it because we've already covered that, but Philando Castile, that was brutal to watch that footage. Do you remember that footage? It was
I don't remember the Castillo footage at all.
He was illegal. He had a legal PETA permit to legal carry, and he told the cop who had pulled them over, "I have a gun, just to let you know. I'm a concealed carry license, blah 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 blah." And he went to get his license and registration, and the cop opened fire and shot him like 7 times. His wife picked out her phone and started streaming on Facebook Live. You know, we saw footage of this man dying. Even the NRA, I think, came out and condemned the police for doing that because they faced so much pressure there. And then obviously the footage of George Floyd himself just slowly being suffocated. I mean, wouldn't you agree that the visceral nature of that kind of violence that people saw on their social media feed probably was a huge reason why so many people felt? I mean, I don't disagree that a lot of people were in lockdowns, and so there was probably like a craving to get outside. But I would argue, yeah, that was some brutal footage, and I think people had a right to be upset.
Yeah, no, I agree that. I mean, it's the same thing kind of with January 6th and with all this other stuff, is that people react more to the visual image than anything else. And so with George Floyd, yes, people would see the image of, you know, or the video of him on the floor, you know, saying he can't breathe and the officer on his back or his neck. And that is like highly what motivated so many people. I agree completely. Right. But even that was somewhat deceptive because obviously, you know, the media would kind of hyperfixate on once he was on the floor saying he couldn't breathe and not really showing the footage of him in the car, you know, refusing to be in the car, saying he was resisting, breathe in the car, resisting arrest, pushing himself onto the floor in the first place, you know, basically doing all this stuff.
But obviously that doesn't justify what happened. And I think people had a right to be upset.
I mean, I think the cop, I mean, I disagree with I don't think the cop intended to kill him, but I think the cop is definitely guilty of, you know, when you're a police officer and someone's in your custody, you're 100% responsible for trying to maintain their safety. And obviously, Chauvin he completely didn't seem like give a fuck and did completely derelict of duty in that regards. So maybe we're veering that he should be found guilty for that, but
maybe we're veering a bit away from like the woke stuff. I mean, I feel like this is all tangentially related, but I'm still struggling to understand where our disagreement is necessarily, because I feel like both of you guys acknowledge that intentionally going for representation in media is not necessarily a bad thing, and I agree. What makes a bad thing is the bad writing, is the bad execution, is the bad acting, blah 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 blah. And I wanted to get some concrete examples from you guys of
the way.
Yeah.
The reason that the way that we got off on the George Floyd thing is because I kind of explained my definition of woke, and then you said that you didn't think like the rank and file people had that ideology that we both agree upon. But this is sort of the destructive nature for a lot of political movements, is that people don't really realize necessarily what exactly it is they're advocating for. And so I guess what I was going to ask you was, you know, do you remember the P plus P equals R craze when that was sort of like the governing philosophy that the left was pushing like a few years ago?
Oh, is that poverty plus privilege? Or
Privilege plus
power plus
equals
privilege
racism.
equals racism?
Right.
Right.
Do you agree that well, I mean, what are your feelings on that statement?
I think I've shifted a little bit in that way because I'll be honest with you guys, back in like 2017 and 18, when I first started covering politics in the Trump era, I will just straight up admit I was completely blind to some of the more unhinged stuff on the left. I just maybe I didn't want to see it or whatever. But my bias was very much to the point where I didn't see what they were talking about. And I went along probably with a lot of like what you guys might have problems with now, but especially during the Biden era, I've clashed way more with like that pocket of the left than MAGA, because they've been louder critics of Biden.
Really? What was something that you like believed in but you've changed your mind on?
I mean, like the example that you gave right there, like I think I probably tweeted something out at some point that was akin to, well, white people, I mean, you can't be racist against white people. I probably unironically tweeted something like that at some point. I don't remember, but it sounds like something I would have said at a point. And
why did you change your mind?
Somebody called me, can I say the word on what platform are you on? I don't know if I can say the word
on YouTube.
Twitter.
Please, no slurs.
I think you can say cracker. I think that's allowed.
I can't on Twitch, so I'm on that platform. So
you can't say cracker.
I don't think so. No. But yeah, people started calling me that word, and I did not like the way that I felt when people were calling me that word. I was like, wow, because it felt like in the moment, it was like someone is trying to like they weren't engaging in the substance of what I was saying, but they were they wanted to dismiss what I had to say because I was white, and I didn't like that. Now, obviously,
do you remember why they were calling you that? Like,
who knows, bro? It could have been about Palestine. It could have been about any number of things. Like, but
okay.
But yeah, but I mean, I still recognize that there's like a difference between that kind of racism and, you know, the sort of the stats that I gave you before. Like one is probably worse than the other. But yeah, I don't know what image you guys had of me in your minds, but
well, no, I was asking because, you know, we're talking about like what is woke and kind of how to conceptualize this. Is that to me, P plus P equals R is like like an easy way to understand sort of the difference, because like liberalism would say, okay, there's a universal set of rules that everyone has to follow and live by. And, you know, that means like, you know, one of those is generally, you know, in liberal societies is don't be racist. Don't judge someone on the color of their skin. And then you kind of have like the woke mentality, which is on its core anti-liberal, that says, no, don't judge people by individuals, judge them on the basis of their like collective identity. So you can treat white people a specific way, you can treat black people a specific way, and that's how you get sort of the P plus P equals R, because white people are viewed as like the oppressor, the majority class. It is okay to essentially be racist against them, and you have to be deferential to minorities.
Right. So I guess the question that pops into my head is like, okay, so would you agree that generational wealth favors like white people in this country? More likely to have more you're more likely to have more wealth savings if you're a white person in this country, and a lot of that comes from like generational kind of.
I know it used to be. I don't know if it still is, because I know like recently, I believe the top earners are Indian and Asian currently, but I don't know what that translates into wealth, generational wealth. Obviously, there's a lot more white people that have been here longer. So
we keep trying to define the philosophy, and you keep switching over to advocate for the philosophy, Hutch. I don't know if you realize you're doing that.
I think I'm advocating for something. I don't, and you guys might call it woke. I'm trying to get into specifics to see if we even disagree, because I don't think it's a bad or a racist thing to do like targeted government aid to sort of try to fill in gaps like generational wealth disparities between white families and black families. To me, that's not woke. It's just kind of sensible policy.
Shouldn't it be based on class anyway?
I mean, we're talking about the averages. So we're talking about, I mean, like, I understand what you're talking about. Like, but Martin Luther King even talked about doing like a holistic targeted or holistic approach when it came to targeting poverty broadly. But he favored stuff like reparations, for example.
I know. Well, I mean, obviously, he was right in the time period where blacks were still treated like second-class citizens in half the country. So,
but he took up the issue of poverty broadly. So, like, it was his philosophy that you could tackle both of these things at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah. So, if you want, I don't know if you guys consider that woke. I guess that's what I'm trying to explore with you guys. Is like, where do we disagree?
I mean, I would say that doing reparations in 2024, I would consider, woke or just not a good idea. I don't think it's right that, you have all these, poor, white people in the Appalachian Mountains that are, have drug problems and lost a lot of their career abilities. They're going to have like their taxes, they don't get like some sort of tax benefit because their skin color, where black people do, because, 2 to 3 generations ago, their ancestors were harmed by someone else's ancestors. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, I'll be honest
You
with
should
you.
just be like, listen, let's help the people who are in the lower income situation overall.
Well, I don't think about reparations just because I would say pragmatism is at the forefront of my politics. So like the first question I ask is like, is this even doable? And if it's not, then I just don't think about it. So I don't think about major gun reform, for example, because I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think about reparations because I just don't think it's going to happen. So I just don't.
But you'd be in favor of it if it could happen? I mean, look, Sitch makes a good point. There are white people that are not experiencing intergenerational wealth too. Do you think it's fair to give reparations to black people just because they're not experiencing intergenerational wealth because of this thing that happened, like Sitch said, generations ago?
Right. I don't think about it very much. I'd be open to arguments one way or the other, but I truly, I'm agnostic when it comes to that. I think that I don't know what you guys think the role of government is, but I see one role of government that I would like to be in my ideal system would be government would fill in the gaps that capitalism, maybe there's some shortfalls there. So if we have people living below like a poverty line, if we have people living below like a minimum standard of living, then I think that it's good and justified for government to come in and intervene in some way, whether that be through tax credits or stimulus programs or social welfare spending or whatever. That's like my whole philosophy there. But I'm not.
You don't think skin color is a good metric for those programs?
I think you can use skin color to highlight disparity, and if you can highlight or identify disparity, then ideally you would want some sort of an intervention to make up for those gaps. That just seems sensible to me. Right, but I don't disagree with you that like a poor person.
You are in favor of using skin color as a metric for
when it's
doling
relevant.
out these programs.
When and if it's relevant.
What would make it relevant?
So, for example, I brought up a moment ago, but the disparity between white households and black households, there's a huge wealth disparity there. Still to this day, even though we ended Jim Crow 60 years ago. I get curious about like, is there a way that we can address that? You don't want to do it in a way that does more harm than good or leaves, like I'm not saying that we should ignore like poor white people. Like I think that poor white people deserve government programs as well. But I'm open to these things and I'm open to arguments against them. I don't feel strongly about this stuff because I just don't think about, I don't think very much about, I don't think I ever think about reparations because it's not going to happen. We know that's not going to happen.
Okay. I mean, yeah. I guess, I mean, if you don't feel strongly about it, it's fine. I'll just, you brought up this example of wealth disparity, and even if there is wealth disparity between races, which I believe there is, I don't think it makes sense for the government to target a policy where they say, okay, well, we're going to specifically, only give, lower income black families money because of that. That doesn't make sense to me, as opposed to just having an overall policy where you say, let's help lower income people. And then obviously on a per capita level, that's going to help proportionally more black people.
I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with that. If there was some policy that you could give me that would treat or that would try to remedy poverty holistically, then of course
I don't know the answer to that question, obviously.
Yeah. Well, I'm like a progressive liberal, so obviously I'm big on like, Yeah, send them money. Let's give them help with housing and school and blah 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 blah. But I thought for some reason I thought we were going to focus on like wokeness in media, because
I mean we weren't really going to focus on wokeness in media was because I don't know if you've seen. I mean, do you know who Konstantin Kissin is on trigonometry?
Yeah, well, I've seen like a couple of his. I'm not super familiar, but I know who he is. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you see? Tucker Carlson had this guy on, Daryl Cooper, who was talking about how like Winston Churchill was the #1 bad guy in World War II. That's what he said.
I heard about that. Yeah.
Right. And so Konstantin's been sort of pushing this concept of like, okay, like there's this thing called the woke right. And he was referring to Daryl Cooper and Tucker Carlson and sort of what they're pushing as the woke right. So yesterday, me and Adam were having this long conversation about, does it make sense to call this sort of anti-liberal version of the right woke or not? So that was kind of the context of the conversation. It wasn't really about media or anything.
It's like the anti-woke. I mean, is it not just, would it not be better just to call it white supremacy? Or are you guys averse to using that term?
That was my argument.
Just seems like,
well, it's a little complicated because while there are definitely white supremacists that are on the anti-liberal far right side, there's also like the monarchist and the weird non-race fascist, if that makes sense. There's like a bunch of different groups there. So I feel like it's not accurate to just be like, oh, they're all white supremacists.
My understanding
but they
of
are
fascism
supremacists,
is that,
obviously. Look, if it's an aristocracy, which is what a monarchy is, how is that not supremacist?
Well, it's not white supremacists.
No, but my argument wasn't really...
thing. Yeah.
My argument was about a supremacist culture versus multiculturalism versus
right. I understand that. Yeah.
So it could be not necessarily. I mean, white supremacy obviously fits in there, but any sort of ethno-nationalism, black nationalism would be a supremacy movement.
Right.
You said non-race fascism, and my understanding of fascism is that there's some element of racial scapegoating. It's like a necessary component. Isn't it?
Well, the necessary component of fascism is that a group of people associate their ethnic group to the land, like the blood and soil attitude. That's my understanding of fascism. But it's not necessarily like when we think of race, we think of like white, black, Asian, like the racism of fascism are like even more subgroup. Like the Germans viewed themselves as like German. They didn't view like the Brits or the French as like the same group of people as the Germans. I think it was the same thing because I think like in fascist, like Nazism is a little bit different than just Italian fascism, but in Italian fascism, my understanding is that he sort of Mussolini united all Italians, even though they had viewed themselves sort of as different ethnic groups, together as like one unified Italy, even if they were sort of bigoted against non-Italians. So that's what I'm saying. Like there's like fascism. I feel like a lot of fascism now, or this kind of like neo-fascism or whatever you want to call it, it's really based on like this desire for like a collectivist fraternal attitude that they feel like liberal individualism has sort of killed. Like there's like a sense of community that they're pining for, essentially.
Yeah, no, I wasn't suggesting that fascism is tied to white supremacy specifically. There's some level of like there's a racial element to it usually.
Usually I would imagine so, yeah.
Yeah. Do you guys think that there are legitimate grievances there in terms of like, if you don't go full fascist and co-sign everything they say, but you were talking about like the reasons why they sort of turned to that ideology. Like, what do you see as sort of like the legitimate grievances there? And like, what would you...
Right. No, well, this is sort of I don't remember if it was Jordan Peterson that said this or someone listening to this the other day. They were saying that part of the way in which extremists take hold is that there's some kind of problem in society that society is not addressing, and only the extremists will sort of bring it up, and then they pile in their own extreme crazy shit like on top of it, and it kind of sucks people down the pathway. And so you have this problem where in our society there's a lot of income inequality. There is people feel that they don't feel like they have the opportunities economically or even romantically to the same extent that their parents did. There's a lot of people not having children, not having families. There's a lot of people that have felt like they've lost their way, sort of. And that, a lot of people kind of, and I don't agree with them, but a lot of people kind of blame liberalism for that, the failings of liberalism for that. And so I think, even though I think those are legitimate concerns, that's how they get kind of sucked down these collectivist rabbit holes where there's like an ideology that says, okay, well, you're going to find meaning through this sort of collective identity, whether it be a race identity or, you know, socialism, a class identity or whatever.
What would you, like, both of you do? For example, I'm curious, like, how would you guys systemically address, for example, you brought up like loneliness, and I think Jordan Peterson touches on this a lot when it comes to like young men.
Right.
And then I've heard him like float some pretty insane ideas. I don't know how committed he was, but you know, like, it's like, well, maybe there should be some kind of state intervention to like make sure that people are like paired up properly. I mean, like, how would you handle the the male loneliness epidemic in a way that turns them away from like fashy kind of light stuff?
Are you talking about when Jordan Peterson was advocating for enforced monogamy, where the state actually abducts women and gives them to incels as wives? Is that what you're talking about?
He said something along those lines. I mean, he didn't get
into
the specifics.
I remember. Oh my God, it was like insane. Can you believe that?
Wait,
I cannot
feel like
believe that Jordan Peterson. He's being sarcastic.
Okay,
He didn't say that.
Clarify then. Because I saw that clip and I vaguely recall that clip. What did Jordan?
He talked about this concept of cultural enforced monogamy, and it kind of got spun that he was implying what you were saying, that like the government's going to come and like give people government mandated girlfriends, and that's not at all what he was talking about. He was talking about how.
Yes, I was kidding, just to make it obvious.
Adam was joking.
Wait.
He was talking about this.
But hold on a second. I feel like I remember Jordan Peterson saying like, I don't know, maybe the state should get involved, like doing one of those open musings kind of thing.
I don't recall that. What I do recall is him talking about how, you know, there used to be a culture in America that would shame people for sleeping around and promote people for getting into stable pair bondings with the intention of raising a family. And when he said culturally enforced monogamy, that's what he was referring to.
Okay. If I find a clip, I'm going to send it to you guys, but I'm
Please
pretty...
do.
Like, I don't remember him.
I'm not saying that he was out here like full-throated suggesting that the state get involved, but I feel like there was a throwaway quote where he was like, well, I don't know, maybe there should be something there.
Well,
do you know the woman that came up with the enforced monogamy quote, the woman who wrote the article, has since recanted on that hit piece she did against Jordan Peterson?
I'm not familiar with that. I remember watching the whole. I remember watching the whole exchange during that interview because it was videotaped, and so I think there was like a 10-minute clip that I remember seeing.
It was not videotaped.
Well, no, he might have, because we're talking about
his response. His response to the article was videotaped.
Right. Yeah, because this concept, the cultural enforcement monogamy, it first came out in a New York Times piece on Jordan Peterson. Was it Nellie Bowles?
Written by Nellie Bowles. Yeah,
Nellie Bowles,
exactly.
Yeah, who wrote this, and she kind of did it in a dishonest way, and I don't know if I recall he'd been interviewed about it afterwards. I don't remember all his answers.
Yeah, he responded to it. People brought it up at one of his shows, and he responded to it. Yeah, and there's clips. I mean, we could watch the clips of his response, but
it's funny because isn't Nellie Bowles is now in a relationship with Barry Weiss, and I believe she's sort of
she's changed her opinion of Jordan Peterson dramatically. So
right, she's kind of become anti-woke left now. So
yeah,
but
yeah, I'll look into it.
But I mean, to answer the question, I don't think there's anything. I'm not sure there's anything the government can do about it, unless there's some way that the government can just try to incentivize people to get into to have families and to have children in a stable family relationship. But
lower home prices would help a lot. I mean, let's be real here.
Yeah, trying to lower housing prices, obviously.
Affordable housing would go a long way.
Giving people tax credits and tax breaks for having children and things of that nature. And there's some...
Sounds like you guys are making the case for Kamala, right?
There you go. There's some social policies or some economic social policies I think need to be changed where it sort of incentivizes women to get divorced or to have children out of wedlock and things of that nature. And I do think that Jordan Peterson is correct that there needs to be sort of a cultural shift where we go back to trying to promote people to trying to get into stable relationships with the intention of raising a family, the nuclear family. That'd be the solution, I think, to a lot of the mean crisis in the world.
No, but seriously though, it sounds like you guys are making the case for Kamala, right?
Yeah, well, Adam and I are both, we like, well, it's kind of a mixed bag because we like that Kamala was talking about building 3 million houses. I think we're sort of like, well, then when we looked into it, because I thought she was saying she wanted to build 3 million houses in 1 year, but she was really saying 3 million houses over 4 years. And I believe that's actually under the current expectations of just what the natural rate of building houses would be. over 4 years.
It wasn't 3 million on top of those regularly built?
She has never specified. She just says 3 million. I think it's expected there'll be 4 million. And she just says we're going to build 3 million houses. So it's like, well, that's a good question. Do you mean 7 million? Like, what do you mean by that?
It wasn't just that. It was expanding the child tax credit to 6,000 for first time parents, and then there was the $25,000 grant for.
Isn't that
families.
lower than Biden's though? Because wasn't Biden going to? I thought Biden was going to give less up front, but more over 18 years than that.
Yeah, he's 2,000 a year for 18 years.
Was it 2,000 a year?
Yeah.
No, I guess
believe
you're right
it
about
was,
that.
yeah. Right.
No, but I think her position is to make the child tax credit permanent, and then which the Senate Republicans blocked, and then also to expand the amount from whatever it was to 6,000 for the firstborn, for parents of a firstborn. I don't know if it would be a second or third.
I like that.
Whatever.
It's a good policy.
Yeah. Are you guys warming up to Kamala? Or are you guys still, or I guess specifically Adam? Are you still leaning Trump here?
That's do you know? Did you look at the name of the stream? Did you look what I named the stream?
No.
Oh, you didn't. Okay.
Is it a
That's
doozy?
good. Sitch, who has the crystal ball? Who is it?
It's you.
I know. Look, never mess with my future telling ability.
I saw you guys taking issue with my thumbnail and title on the video that you guys replied to, but there's a funny story about that.
I don't even remember that.
It was brief, but there's a funny story about that.
I heard you took issue with me blocking you on Twitter. You are still mad about it. I can't believe you're.
I'm not. Live your life.
Look,
I'm
if
fine.
you're losing, if you're losing sleep over it. Look, I already unblocked.
The first few days were rough. I won't lie. It was difficult to eat, and I didn't sleep well. But the funny story about
Adam.
The funny story about that thumbnail and title is that I originally told my editor, I was like, nah, let's scale back on that a little bit. And then I looked at what you guys normally do for your titles and thumbnails. And I was like, oh, never mind. Let it rip.
I like it.
For hugely famous people, what are you talking about? Like, I would never go after a smaller. No, not at all.
No,
like, we
you're
don't even
punching
know how
down. How dare you? We're oppressed victims here.
You are a much bigger channel than us.
I am just getting back into YouTube and building it back up again after years of inactivity.
If you're saying I can't go after Trump or Kamala Harris in the thumbnail, then I mean, let's be real.
I mean, like, listen, we all play the game, right? Like, we know you got to do like a punchy title and
I don't.
like
what are you talking about?
Tears in the thumbnail. Who does your thumbnails?
I guess I did do tears in the thumbnail with you. Yes, I think I did.
I think that's why the editor chose to do that. We took inspiration from you guys.
We talked about the thumbnail and the title for like 10 seconds, didn't we?
I didn't say you guys were talking about it for like 45 minutes, but I saw you took issue with it just briefly.
Okay.
I thought
it was funny. I thought it was dumb.
I don't recall. So.
Well, I thought it was weird because you had like the little cry face on my avatar, and I'm like, I'm over here as the person who says that I won't vote for Trump on principle. So it was weird that you're sort of casting me as like, I'm upset that people are saying Kamala beat Trump in the debate.
Look, I'm going to vote for Trump on principle, on the principle that it's going to make.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, on the principle that it's going to make Hutch cry. That's that's a principle I'm enacting.
I like it.
It's not that deep, Sitch. It was just aesthetically, I liked the way that the cry face looked on your guy.
On the suit avatar. Gotcha. Yeah. Look at that.
It felt better to me.
Fake. Look at this.
How do you guys feel about the state of the race right now? Are you guys feeling good about Trump?
I still think it's really close. But I
can't call.
I think I would definitely at this point I would prefer Kamala to win, but I don't know. I think she has a good shot of losing currently.
Do you guys think it's interesting that Kamala and the Democrats seem to take the position of that, even though she is slightly ahead and it's within the margin of error in basically every swing state, within 2 points? Even though like the conventional wisdom right now is that she is slightly favored to win, but the Democrats and Kamala are telling their people, we're the underdog still, we're behind, we got a lot of work to do. And it's the opposite take in MAGA world. They're over there saying all the polls are fake, he's ahead. So, it's just an interesting sort of like difference in tactic there.
Well, I think with the Kamala camp, well, first of all, my understanding is that Kamala has to win by more than the margin of error to win the electoral vote anyway. So if she just wins by like 1% in each state, or I guess overall, maybe I guess if she won by 1% in each state, then she would win. But if she won by 1% overall, then she would still lose because she needs to win by like a higher margin.
So just to stop you there, that's not necessarily the case because Republicans have made marginal gains in states where they don't have a chance. So Republicans have made marginal gains in New York. In fact, that manifested in that New York was one of the reasons why they took back the House in 2022. And California, there's been some marginal gains in California as well. And so if you can win over like Republican voters in California, it doesn't have any impact on the Electoral College, but you're chipping away at that Electoral College disadvantage. So she could only win the popular vote by like 0.5 and still win. We don't know if there's that same Electoral College disadvantage built in this time around.
Oh, I think I understand what you're saying, but like you're essentially saying that because the Republicans have made up ground in blue states, that would kill the popular vote advantage that Democrats would have normally. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly right. Yeah. It chips away at the sort of baked in Electoral College disadvantage that Democrats have had for the last several cycles.
I mean, I would be worried if I was on Kamala's team that if the Republicans are making ground in blue states, that's not going to bode well for swing states though.
Trump is going to win California. It's definitely in the bag for him.
Were it not for those 3 million undocumented people voting in 2016, he would have won.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you know that his source?
Those undocumented people are voting for Trump. What are you talking about?
Did you know that his source for that was literally just some guy on Twitter? Like some random guy claimed that 3 million people vote. You did know that. And then the guy got interviewed on, I don't know, CNN or something. And they asked to see his sources. And he was just like, nope.
He just made it up. Yeah.
Yeah. Donald Trump formed an entire voter integrity commission to look into.
Don't you know the Bill Barr story?
Which one?
He's like on Air Force One and he's like bitching at Bill Barr, like about all the voter fraud. And Bill Barr, he kind of goes through like a list of 20 things, and Bill Barr tells him that each one of these voting fraud things have been debunked. Yeah. And then when it gets to the end of the list, he just kind of repeats himself. Yeah. And Bill Barr's just like, oh, you've become unmoored from reality at this point. Or that's how he described. I don't know if he told Trump that, but he described it as, afterwards as that.
There's a HBO documentary called Stopping the Steal that's all about the elector stuff that just came out. It's really good. So if you're interested, yeah. But they interviewed Bill Barr for that.
But to go back to your question, I think what's going on with Kamala, they're both trying to win. So Kamala is saying we're the underdog, we're the underdog to get people to go out and vote. And I think the Trump saying like, oh, actually, I guess you could argue that Trump saying, oh, we're winning, but the polls are showing otherwise. It could have one of two effects. Number one, I mean, they could just be saying that because that's what Donald Trump says. And you kind of have to, the Republican Party has to kind of work around whatever Donald Trump does or says. But it could also be because they're trying to say like this narrative of, well, because the Democrats are going to steal the election, we have to win by such a high margin. So they're both trying to use this message to get out as much voting as possible for their side.
Yeah, I think it's a way to, and I think it's a way to kind of lay the groundwork to claim fraud later. Because if you've been telling your supporters we were up in the polls the whole time, and then all of a sudden all these voter dumps, then he might try to do the same. What are the Donald Trump policies that get you excited, Adam?
I mean, I'm not really looking at policy prescriptions per se on the Donald Trump side. I mean, obviously, I think if you're interested in immigration, I think that Trump is far more likely to pass an immigration bill than Kamala Harris is, even though Kamala Harris, says she's going to pass an immigration bill. I think Kamala Harris has more of an out not to pass an immigration bill because her coalition is divided on that.
Well, I don't know if you agree.
Would you like Kamala? Look, I asked what policies Kamala had that you liked, and you didn't mention immigration. Do you even care about immigration? If Kamala doesn't pass an immigration bill, are you going to be upset?
No, I think the bipartisan bill was good because that's the best that you were going to get in a divided government. I mean, it was partly crafted by Langford, partly crafted by Sinema, partly crafted by I think another Democrat, and then the White House was negotiating it for 5 months. The issue at the border is totally untenable. Our asylum laws were written in the 60s, well before we saw this level of influx. So clearly, something needs to happen. And so I did support the substance of that bill. I thought it was a mistake for Donald Trump to spike it. And
okay, so you did support the bill.
Yeah.
Look, I'm asking you a very
I
specific question. If Kamala Harris gets into office and she never brings up the immigration bill again, it goes the way of the public option. Like, obviously, Biden talked about the public option in the election. As soon as he was elected, never came up again. If immigration goes the same way as that with Kamala Harris, are you personally going to not vote for her in 2028?
No, well, no, to answer your question, but I think that would be it's almost unthinkable to me that there wouldn't be some kind of movement on the immigration thing. Would you agree that it looks good for the Democrats in the House and it looks
I'm not asking you.
Well, hold on. Would you agree that it looks good for the Democrats in the House and it looks good for Republicans in the Senate right now?
I'm asking you a very specific question. I'm asking you if she can't pass a bill. Like, there's two ways this could go. She could not bring it up and not pass the bill. She could also bring it up and the Republicans could block her. They blocked her for political reasons already, right?
Well, they blocked Biden.
No, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
They blocked the bill that would have been beneficial to both Biden and Kamala Harris, right? Kamala Harris is on the stump right now saying that Donald Trump blocked a bill for political reasons, and a bipartisan border security bill.
We agree on that, right?
Right. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Okay.
Look, of course he did. It's
Right.
like, of course he did it for political reasons, right? Everyone in this space is operating for political reasons.
Yeah.
But so if Kamala has said, I will bring that border bill up and I will sign that bill. But the thing that she never answers and nobody ever asks her is, well, the Republicans blocked you once for political reasons. What makes you so sure they aren't going to block you again for political reasons? And because they don't want you to run on the fact that you passed a bipartisan border bill in 2028. They could do the exact same thing.
I mean, I think that would be politically foolish of them to do that after this election. You don't think the Republicans ever do anything that's politically foolish? I mean, they shut down the government. Come on, Hutch. Well, I don't think that's a compelling reason to vote for Trump. Like to tell me like, well, what if the Republicans block? This is not about Trump. This is not about Trump. This is not about who I'm voting for. I'm asking you very specifically. If the Republicans blocked Kamala's bill, that would not make me vote for a Republican in 2028. First of all, I'm not a single issue voter. And second of all, that just wouldn't motivate me to vote for a Republican. But immigration is not if you were a single issue voter, I'm assuming immigration would not be your issue. Like, how would you rank your issues? What is your big issue aside from the child tax credit? I'm to be honest with you, I'm kind of in your camp where like, I'm not super focused on policy right now. I mean, I do have like a general list of like priorities that I think take place. Like anything that addresses income inequality, you guys brought up income inequality before. That's like anything that can raise the minimum standard of living for like working class people, whether that be through an increase of wages or tax credits, whatever government mechanism helps people so that they're not stretched beyond their means. I'm in favor of these kinds of sweeping policies. Like, for example, I look at like the Nordic states and I just salivate. So like government provided healthcare, 18 months paid maternity leave, paid sick leave, paid vacation, all these like, robust welfare state. Like that's my model. Like, so if you're looking for like my list of priorities, then Sweden, Finland, Norway would be good examples of these kinds of things. But I'm not super focused on policy, and I don't think you are. I don't think this election is going to be decided on policy. I am, but the politicians are not really catering to my policy desires anyway. So it's kind of welcome to being an American. That's that's a democracy with 330 million people with a divided government. It's really hard to make people happy right now. So would you be in favor of teaching kids in elementary school like this concept that like people can be born the wrong gender or that gender is separate from your sex? I think in a general sense, it's probably a good exercise to teach kids that what transness is and that trans people exist. Yeah. I think I'm fine with that. Now, like, I think some people hear that and they think like, oh, the teacher's going to pull the kid aside and be like, I think you're trans. You should transition. I just don't think that this is happening. There's no evidence that this is happening. but like, so I looked into this. I don't know if you guys did. And what I found in like child developmental psychology was that you can start exhibiting symptoms, or I guess traits, like trans traits, as early as like 3 years old. And what does it mean at that age? We're not talking about like sexuality, because we're not talking about someone who's sexually developed, but we're talking about like a boy who when you take him to the store, they only want to wear like girls' clothes, and they only want to be like, they want to be called a girl. Like that can happen at that like early age. Now that's really rare. Like 3 years. I'm not saying that's very common. I mean, again, this is like a fraction of a percentage of the population. And then the question is like, well, what do you do? Like, what is the best for that child? And so my opinion is like, I defer to the experts. I don't pretend to know more than people that observe children and are building off of decades of scientific research, observation. And I think a lot of people are just not open to what the data show. And I mean, I can understand people being reticent about some things. Like, I don't like, but for example, do you agree that the hysteria around like kids getting bottom surgery is just completely fabricated nonsense? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I believe most people don't get first of all, I believe bottom surgeries have kind of dropped off a lot anyways nowadays, because people are kind of realizing there's a lot of problems with it. But even the people that would get it, I believe usually you have to be at least 17 or 18 to get bottom surgery. There's more of a concern with puberty blockers, hormones, and then with prepubescent girls getting their breasts removed, when they're like 14 or older.
No prepubescent girls are getting their breasts removed. I don't even know what that means. If you're talking about prepubescent,
I'm sorry. I
how does that work?
Post-pubescent. You're correct. Post-pubescent.
There were some instances. So in my understanding is that there have been instances of girls as early as 15 or 16 that get mastectomies as a result of extreme dysphoria. And then you have examples like, what's her name? Chloe Cole, is that her name? She's become like a poster child for the anti-trans stuff. But this is not common. Like the puberty blockers, those are prescribed, but it's not. I mean, all things considered, it is quite rare. But they don't do hormone therapy typically until like 15, 16 years old at the earliest. And especially bottom surgery, it is not happening until they're 18 years old. And it's just totally common in right-wing anti-woke circles for them to think that it's like ubiquitous all over the country. There's kids that are getting... Trump himself is saying like, little Jimmy, he can go to school one day and then he comes home and he's a girl. And people take him literally and they think that's actually happening. And it's not. It's hysteria.
So my issue with the whole thing is like, you brought this example of, the young 3-year-old who, maybe they like to wear dresses or want to be identified as a girl, whatever, is that when you do look at the data that's collected by the American Psychiatric Association, the people that write the DSM, the DSM, they wrote the DSM-5 and all that stuff.
You're going to talk about desistance rates, right?
Right. Yeah. Is that the desistance rates were so high. It was like 80 to 90%. And this is when you would just allow people to go through puberty without any sort of treatment or puberty blocking, anything whatsoever. And that, it's the same thing with those, like a lot of those little kids. I mean, my mom was a teacher. She knew little kids like this too, the little boys that want to wear purses and their dads would get all like upset. And it's just like, no, they just, maybe they just thought it looked cool or, from their mom or something. Little boys like to do, put their mom's clothes on or something, or little girls like to put their dad's clothes on. And it doesn't necessarily like mean that they suffered from gender dysphoria. And when you have this situation where the desistance rates were so massively high back in the day, and then now all of a sudden, when you put kids on puberty blockers, the desistance rates drop to like, the 20%. Just so you go from 80, 90% to 20%. To me, that's an indication that the data shows you shouldn't be giving kids puberty blockers at all. You shouldn't be putting them on this pathway.
That's an interesting way to interpret the data. I mean, another way you could look at it is like, if you are given the resources, the tools, the medications, the treatments that would allow you to successfully stall like male puberty, for example, then someone might be much more inclined to transition, because to transition after you've already been through like male puberty is obviously like physically a much different outcome. I mean, I've just anecdotally, I've spoken with people that their lives just like, if we had a brain scan and we could identify for sure an element of someone's brain to say, okay, this person is trans. And you could do that as early as like 7, 8 years old. I mean, there are certainly some people that have experienced transness or trans identity at a very young age, and that didn't change all throughout their adulthood.
To be clear, when you say trans, you are only referring to someone that has gender dysphoria, right? Like you just mean kind of colloquially?
No,
'Cause
well,
trans
I mean,
means
that's what
broader than
colloquial.
gender dysphoria.
So gender dysphoria is a state of distress. It's negative consequences as a result of an incongruence between
Right.
your biological sex and your
It's the
identity.
medical reason to transition.
Right. Yes.
You can have someone who identifies as trans, well, because I guess what I'm saying is because the umbrella term for trans is so broad, it can include so many things that have nothing to do with anyone actually desiring to transition. So I'm trying to make sure that when you say trans, you just mean like, someone who wants to transition from male to female or female to male or something to that effect, right?
I mean, I guess I would say broadly, but I know there is some debate now, because it used to be that if you would only be considered trans if you were actually like taking steps to transition. And as I understand it now, the criteria has been loosened in the last, like, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, where you don't even have to.
It's not like an official criteria. It depends who you're asking, but.
Well, in a medical sense, I mean, I think they've loosened that up, so we're like you can identify as trans and not have any desire or intention to take hormones or have any kind of surgery or
trans
whatever.
always meant that in a medical sense.
Well, I follow a couple trans people, and they were talking about, like, Brianna Wu, for example. She's been talking about how, like, the standards have changed, and like there used to be an expectation that you would have to, like, you would be transitioning, and that there's no longer that trend. So I know that there's some like robust debate that goes on, and I'll leave that to, like, I don't feel qualified to really pipe up about that. But
going back, because when I brought up the desistance thing, and you were talking about, like, it's harder for people to transition after they go through puberty, which, I mean, that makes logical sense. The idea is, what I'm saying is that from a medical perspective, the medical industry is looking at this from the perspective of, like, if a child has an issue, like they feel this gender dysphoric feeling, they go through puberty, and that cures 80% of the people from having that. And if you give them puberty blockers, it stops 80% of the people from having that cure. Why would you stop people from going through puberty? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, right. That's how you're interpreting the data, but
right.
You could also interpret it to mean that once somebody goes through, like, male puberty, they're going to be way less inclined to want to transition because they've already physically developed to a point where they maybe couldn't pass.
Well, that's not what desistance means. It doesn't mean that they still have that feeling of gender dysphoria. Desistance means they do no longer feel the gender dysphoria, not that they just don't want to go through with the surgeries or something.
Right. I mean, what I would have to dig into the data that you're looking at. I know that a lot of people interpret these data sets to mean very different things, but I think generally speaking, I think, like, when you're talking about gender identity with kids, if you're talking about, like, gender dysphoria with kids, my understanding is that the process is really intensive. Like, you are constantly in contact with a physician, with a therapist. It's a long, drawn out, methodical process. And I understand that this makes some people uncomfortable. I understand the reasons why, but I'm looking, the only thing I'm concerned with is just improving people's quality of life, reducing rates, reducing.
If there was, like, a theoretical pill that someone could take that would, like, cure gender dysphoria instead of transitioning, would you support they do that instead of transitioning?
That's a tough question. I mean, I would support anybody's right to make that decision for themselves, I suppose.
Well, but you don't think that, like, because from a medical perspective, if that pill exists, I don't see why there's no medical justification for transitioning after that point. There's some alternative treatment.
I don't know how to quantify all these variables. So, like, it's like, there's like a, so, like, in recovery, there's like a hypothetical thought experiment where, a lot of drug addicts, when they get into recovery and they do, like, 12-step program or whatever, it becomes like a big part of their life. And so then there's this thought experiment of, like, well, what if you could take a pill to, your addiction? Would you do it? And a lot of people say no, because, recovery is, so I don't really know how to answer these hypotheticals, because it's like, it's really up to the individual. Like, I would probably take that pill and not be an addict, but some people wouldn't,
Right. But, like, that's like, I mean, I don't know if it's fair for me to ask someone who's trans that question, because it's like, that calls into question a lot of their life experience. But Matt, that's why I was asking you, because you're not trans. You're, like, should be looking at it from a more, like, objective standpoint. It's like, obviously, if we had a pill that would, heal people from being addicted to certain substances from a general broad consensus perspective of society, that would be the ideal treatment. Even if someone is able to, by going through a recovery program, have some life benefit. I mean, very often horrible things happen to people and they grow stronger, from them. But that doesn't mean you should go like inflicting horrible things on people.
It's just a difficult question for me to ask because I have no idea what it's like to be trans, and so I really don't know. Yeah, I want to go back to the question that I wanted to ask you guys though, because like,
what was that?
Because there's like different schools of thought, but I feel like it's a mainstream conservative perspective at this point that transness is not a real thing. That transness is inherent. It's more akin to like schizophrenia.
Do you think we're conservative, Hutch? You think we're
no?
Oh, okay.
I think probably a lot of people in your audience are, and so I guess I'm speaking. I guess I'm speaking to them. But like,
we could put a poll up if you want to ask them. So
no, I mean, if you guys want.
Well, what's the question?
So the question was like, if you could identify like a mental, if you could map someone's brain, if you could do a CT scan or whatever, and identify, okay, this kid is definitely trans. They're 7 years old, but they're definitely trans. They're going to be trans for the rest of their lives. Would you support gender affirming care at that point? And I feel like a majority of conservative people would still say no, because they consider transness to be degenerate, an abomination, and they just don't want to affirm it at all. I mean, would you guys approve of gender affirming care if we could 100% identify transness in a 7-year-old? I'm not talking about surgery.
I'm not talking about I think adults should be able to transition even if they don't have gender dysphoria, which Sitch disagrees with me on. So
why would somebody do that?
Just because they want to transition, they want to live their lives as the opposite sex.
Adam's an artist, so he's weird.
Okay. I mean, some people think that men transition into women so they can beat them up in sports, which is just insane. I mean, I just feel like there's
look, I don't support men. I don't support trans women in women's sports though. So look, if a person wants to transition so that they can get an Olympic medal, I don't support that, obviously. So
I don't think that's
But if they want to transition just because they want to do it because they think they'd have a more satisfying life, then I think they should be allowed to try it. But the problem is the kids.
I'm talking about the kids though. Like if you could identify with 100% scientific certainty, this 7-year-old.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. Look, there are kids right now that will grow up to transition, whether because they have gender dysphoria or just because they want to. The problem is the false positives. I think gender dysphoria is like a common experience for adolescents that they grow out of.
Right. But when we're talking about major steps like hormone therapy and surgeries, the regret rate for these are very low. Like, for example, getting knee surgery there's a higher regret rate for knee surgery than there is for transitioning. And I don't know if you can devise a system that could 100% eliminate the risk of somebody making a decision like that and changing their mind. And if that does happen, that's obviously like not celebrating Chloe Cole's situation. I think that's a very difficult situation. I just don't think you should point to her and say, this means that you should cut off gender affirming care for everybody across the board.
Do you know why? You know the argument for why younger people should be allowed to transition, why people should be allowed to transition before puberty?
It all has to do with like mental health stuff. So the reason why transitioning, gender affirming care is the most common treatment for gender dysphoria is because we can observe a substantial reduce in sexuality and self, especially if you get support from your peers, your family, and your community. If you can get all those in conjunction together, then you greatly reduce the risk. Now, like a lot of...
Well, why not just wait, though? Why not just wait until they're 18?
Well, if you allow someone to go through male puberty...
that we have to do it so early?
If you allow someone to go through male puberty before they have an opportunity to transition to female, then that's a huge obstacle. Then you get... Who's the swimmer? What's the swimmer's name again? Leah Thomas?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like imagine if they were given puberty blockers before they developed, and it's just a totally different outcome. So yeah, you're saying it sounds like you're saying that they would pass better, which I think is the common argument that people do make. Yeah. But how can someone
who's never experienced life as like an adult male or an adult female make the decision that they would like, or that life would be better as the other one?
Well, so for puberty blockers, the whole purpose of puberty blockers is to give them more time. You understand? Like, it's to give them more time so that, you know, if they do change their mind, then you can get off puberty blockers and you'll go through that
Yeah,
period
but you
of
would
your
still,
development.
even if you put off puberty, you're still putting off the thing that would give them the information that they need to make a decision, them being an adult female or an adult male. You're holding that off.
Right.
So all the time in the world is not going to help them.
I don't know if that's
make
true.
the decision.
I think the argument for puberty blockers is that you give them more time so that they have more time to think about it. Like, whatever decision is made when it comes to this kind of care for people that are under the age of 18, I think should be done very carefully. I think should be heavily supervised. I think they should be meeting with a therapist twice a week. I think they should be regularly meeting with a physician. Like, but I think that is like that to my knowledge, that is what is the norm now. And I think a lot of right-wingers think that it's this flippant decision that's made on the fly. Like, kids just wake up one day and they're like, I feel like a girl. And then all of a sudden they're bombarded with hormones and surgery. And that's just not what's happening. But I think the issue goes further.
Have you read any of the books on this topic? Like, have you read the book on the Tavistock? I think it's called A Time to Think.
No,
it's like
I'm not familiar with this
a lot of
book.
literature on this now. So,
well, there's a lot of data on this on when it comes to reducing suicide harm. I mean, there's pretty much a scientific consensus that these things, when done properly,
that exists. But there's a book.
The consensus around reducing suicidality after treating gender dysphoria with transitioning.
There's a book on. It's about the Tavistock Clinic in England that was actually closed down, and a lot of the European countries are not doing this kind of treatment for people below the age of 18 now, because they don't think the science is there for this. So America's sort of out to lunch on it.
Wait,
well,
no,
you could read that book.
Real quick though, I don't think that's true. I think it was just England and Sweden were doing sort of strategic pauses on puberty blockers specifically while they accumulate more like long-term data, because they want to assess the risk. But even in Sweden, they still prescribe puberty blockers in what they call extreme cases of dysphoria. This is not, I don't think it's the case that it's like most or all European countries have abandoned gender affirming care for kids. Am I wrong about that? I don't think I'm wrong.
There was 5. I don't know how many countries we consider European and what the other ones are doing. So I can't answer on the most.
Why are puberty blockers banned in the UK?
The reason
when
that
did the NHS stop puberty blockers? What is the UK stance on gender affirming care?
This was within.
No, I was just going to say, look, if you haven't read much on this, there's a great book on the Tavistock Clinic that I think could change your perspective on this. I really don't think, and obviously, I mean, it seems like you care about people and you don't want people to be in this situation. So.
No, I don't want anybody to start the process of transitioning and then do something that they regret. That would be terrible. But
yeah, that's what people want to avoid, obviously.
Sure, and I think that's a sensible thing to avoid. My concern is that they might be overcorrecting, and now you're denying care to people that would benefit from these treatments because you have someone that regrets it. So I don't base this all on like a gut feeling. I haven't read this particular book that you're mentioning here, but I've done a ton of I've looked into so many studies and how different countries do these kinds of things for years now. I used to feel differently about trans people. I don't know about you guys, but I was 10 years ago, I remember thinking oh, this is a delusion. We shouldn't indulge the delusion. And then I went into it with an open mind, and I saw that a lot of people, and I've spoken with anecdotally, I've spoken with a lot of people who feel like gender affirming care literally saved their lives. And so that's all I care about. So yeah.
What's wrong with delusions?
I guess it depends on the delusion.
Why are you down on delusions?
Well, to go back and answer your question, which was, about how this should all play out. I know my view on gender dysphoria has basically always been the same, because I remember, back a million years ago when I was in college in my psych classes, they talked about gender dysphoria. So I always looked at it from like a medical perspective. And I thought it was kind of interesting when, 10, 15 years later, all of a sudden this becomes like this big social issue kind of out of nowhere. To answer your question, like, yeah, if there was a brain scan, and I've always said this, and it's kind of funny, and I literally have like videos, I think from like 2016 about this. Yeah, if there was like a brain scan machine and they knew exactly what to look for and what caused gender dysphoria, and maybe now with machine learning, they'll be able to figure that out or something, but that would, correctly determine who exactly has gender dysphoria and who doesn't, then that would definitely make me feel way better in terms of, putting people on puberty blockers and doing all sorts of treatments, until they had a better treatment option come along. So, and I think that's kind of what a lot of people on the right are reacting to is there's this fear of, oh no, my kid's going to get like tricked or going to wrongly, falsely, positively identify as trans and go through the surgeries and it's going to fuck them up and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that kind of creates the sort of libs of TikTok backlash that you're referring to.
Right, but that's the hysteria that I'm referring to. So someone can have, right, I think, a completely justified concern. Because I think that is obviously people want the best treatment for kids. People don't want kids making any kind of irreversible decisions that they may regret. But people are taking that concern and it's turning into something much uglier than that. Like I observe a lot of discourse at this point where it's just there's, especially on like Twitter, it's becoming more and more and more prolific where there's people that are just straight up they're degenerates, they're mentally ill. Yes, they don't belong. They don't belong in they don't belong visible in polite society, and we shouldn't be indulging any of this, and that's where I think it just gets kind of insane.
Yeah, I don't support that at all. I think it should always be looked at. But I think that's the issue. My position was this should be looked at as a medical condition, like any other medical condition. And I think part of my issue with sort of and how it gets tied into politics is like it moved somewhere in like the mid 2010s. It moved out of the realm of being a medical condition into somehow becoming like an identity issue that got aligned with gay issues when, being trans and being gay have like nothing to do with each other and they shouldn't even be in the same ballpark. And yet for some reason they get conceptualized together and you have this weird gender ideology that sort of gets tied into all this stuff. And at least from my perspective, that's what I'm worried about in schools is like this kind of far left gender ideology being taught to children, as opposed to just saying like, there's this thing called gender dysphoria and some people have this medical condition and just kind of talking about it from a clinical perspective.
I don't know if I think it's still treated in a medical sense. I think it always had to do with identity. I think the reason why transness gets lumped in with homosexuality is there's this queer sort of umbrella, and it's basically anything that isn't heteronormative, anything that isn't just cisgendered man, cisgendered woman, and they're sexually attracted to each other. Anything that's outside of that
ideology that's like corrupted the thought process around this stuff.
Is it a political ideology?
Yeah. Is this idea that there's a heteronormative lens at which, society says you should exist under. And if you don't exist under this heteronormative lens, you get shunted off into being, quote, queer. And all the queers have to sort of unify together to advocate for some sort of queer identity.
Well,
and it gets even more weird on the fringes because then a lot of the queer literature is actually advocating that the only way to fight oppressive structures is to identify as queer in the first place.
Well, I think that's when it bucks into politics, because we're not just talking about identity at that point. We're talking about policy. We're talking about like rights. We saw, I think, over 400 anti-trans bills, like the largest amount of anti-trans bills in like the last 3 years. It was more than like the previous 10 years.
Right, but there's been this explosion of young people identifying as trans that doesn't actually make sense with the previous rates in the scientific literature on the subject.
Well, you say explosion, and it's like we're talking about like from 0.3% to 0.7% or something like that. There's still like
but when you're talking about hundreds of millions of people, that's a massive increase.
Right, but when you say
100% increase.
Well, so I don't know. Are you guys familiar with the poll? There was a poll that came out recently where they asked Americans like, what percentage of the country do you think are trans? And it was like most people thought it was like fucking 30%. It's like the
police shootings. People always estimate because they just hear about the subject a lot.
Exactly. Yeah. So.
But like if you have a situation where I think the number was something because before, the mid 2010s, there was a huge sex difference between people identifying as trans. When I say sex difference, I mean like birth sex. So people who were born male had like 4 times, I believe, are 4 times more likely to identify as trans or to have gender dysphoria than girls. And then all of a sudden, when that goes from 4-to-1 to 1-to-1, or even in some states, the females go past the males, and actually there's more women identifying as trans than men. I mean, to me, that's like a huge red flag. Is like, okay, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Something is going on here.
Well, that's one way to interpret that is with alarm. Another way you could interpret it is that people feel more comfortable to live authentically. Like when I look at that, I think
just women though.
No, I'm talking about, I mean, this applies to anybody who otherwise would have stayed in the closet were it not for social norms shifting and changing. So to me, I'm happy to hear that people feel more comfortable to explore that rather than live a life of like quiet, like internal like rage and shame.
Well, no, but like, no, what I'm saying is, so, okay, I agree that if there's something that is socially taboo and then suddenly becomes socially acceptable, obviously there's going to be increase in the amount of people that do or identify as whatever the new socially acceptable thing. So yes, if there's a social taboo on being trans and then it becomes acceptable, you would expect to see an increase. I agree with that, but you'd expect to see an increase across the board. You wouldn't expect to see an increase where just in young girls, suddenly when it's 4-to-1 boys to girls, suddenly that becomes 1-to-1 or even 2-to-1 in some cases for girls to boys. That doesn't make any sense.
It makes sense insofar even if it's even if it went those rates went higher with young women, it makes sense that more people overall are feeling more comfortable to come out in that way and express their identity in that way. And I think I think this just speaks to the fact that like whatever the process looks like, it needs to be like very careful. And so you could have a situation where somebody decides, maybe they're young and they want attention, or they're confused or whatever, and they want to be addressed as the opposite sex or whatever, and they start that transition. Well, ideally you would have like a team of professionals working with that kid that could identify if this was the case. You ideally you would have somebody who was qualified who could say like, let's explore this. Like, do you really think that this is what's going on? And I'm sure that you could help mitigate a lot of that risk as long as you have qualified people in those positions that are guiding people through these decisions, which I think is already the case,
Well, like I agree with what you're saying 100% in theory. My problem is that when I see like these rates increase the way that I talked about, you have a handful of psychologists or psychiatrists point to that and say, okay, well, we need to look into this. And like, it's sort of died down now to some extent, but in the 2015 to 2022 kind of era, it was like, no one was allowed to question any of this stuff. If anyone questioned any of this stuff, they were, labeled as transphobe, they get fired, they get attacked. I forget, you had that clinic that shut down in Canada. You have all this stuff that happens. Ray Blanchard has been attacked, relentlessly for talking about autogynephilia or anything related to this field. And so I don't have any faith whatsoever in basically the psychological or psychiatric field in making correct determinations about whether children have gender dysphoria because of the political correctness around it. And also because, they're all financially incentivized to give people the most expensive treatment anyway.
I think I just have probably broadly more faith in our institutions than you do, because I think I would agree. Yeah, I think probably for the most part, people that get into a field like being a child developmental psychologist or a physician or whatever, I think vast majority of these people get into these fields because they want to help people, and they're just interested in what the data shows is like the best course of treatment.
What would shake your faith?
Well, I would have to see something compelling to suggest that it's like this, as a lot of right wingers are suggesting, that they think it's like this full on industry where now you have these professionally educated people, these academics and these doctors, and they've all like gotten together and they've just, they've decided that this is like a windfall for them. And oh my God, we can make so much money if we just trans all these kids. I haven't seen any evidence that this is actually going on. And I feel like if you were to make an appointment with a therapist or with a physician. Just like ask them questions. Like if you just like got curious about it and ask these questions, and like I have way more faith in that than I have faith in like podcasters and libs of TikTok and blah 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 blah. That just, they haven't shown me any compelling reason to believe that there are these like there's this evil cabal of professionals that are trying to trans kids because it's going to make them millions of dollars. I just don't see that happening.
Well, look, there's not that. That's not the only argument here, though. Like the people in the Tavistock clinic weren't doing it because they were in it for the money. They were doing it because they thought they were helping these kids. But still, they had reservations about it, and those reservations went unaddressed and were basically brushed under the rug.
I can't speak to this particular clinic. I don't know the story that you're talking about, but I mean, you can have individual instances of medicine. They're practicing medicine. It's not like perfect science 100% of the time.
It's pervasive in the entire institution.
What is pervasive?
Many people that work there that were questioning that they were actually doing good in the world, that they were actually helping people. They wanted more scientific studies to back up what they were doing. And like the Tavistock clinic commissioned a lot of studies that went in the wrong direction for them, and they basically buried them.
I can't speak to this particular clinic, but I'm very much on the side of data and observation and compiling evidence.
Look, I only bring it up because you have this idea that these clinics are incorruptible, but I mean that's nothing but a gut. Okay, well,
I didn't say that.
So you think these clinics could be corrupted then?
I think any human being or any institution or any specific location can be corrupted.
You said you had more faith in the institutions, and you literally said that
broadly.
You think that there are
broadly. You said I don't know if you're suggesting that this Tavistock situation.
Look, you said you said that you thought that there were people who were involved in this that knew what they were doing. They had the right motivations. They were doing it for a good cause, and that they were doing good work. That was like your argument
broadly
just a second ago.
Broadly, yes, that's what I believe.
Okay,
but I never said that like you can't have individual instances of bad things happening, negligence or.
Well, look, I only brought it up. I only brought it up because I'm saying, what are you basing that on? You're saying I'm basing that on my gut intuition. Like you haven't looked into the situation specifically. Like you don't have.
No, I have. I just haven't read this specific book.
Right. But look. This book makes a case. This book is basically outlining why the Tavistock Clinic closed down, the famous Tavistock Clinic in England. And look, you can make an argument that before puberty blockers, the Tavistock Clinic was actually doing good work because a lot of people would get gender dysphoria and they would go in and they would do talk therapy. They didn't have solutions other than talk therapy. And that's how they came to the realization that a lot of it resolves. I think it's like 80 to 90% of people that get gender dysphoria, if they just go through puberty actually resolves it. So those statistics were compiled from these gender clinics before puberty blockers became a thing. But I'm saying, look, I'm not saying, I understand you haven't read the book about the terrible case, the tragic case, but I'm asking you, like, have you read a book on the cases that you're laying out?
Well, I've independently studied. I mean, like anytime I try to talk about anything, I try to spend a decent amount of time familiarizing myself. And so like I went looking at studies all over the world. And
right, but a study won't necessarily tell you,
or also
like
meta
the
studies,
culture, right? But it won't necessarily tell you the culture inside one of these clinics or anything like that. It won't tell you like a lot of these people come in, like a big claim that a lot of these detransitioners are making is that they went to a clinic and they like prescribed them puberty blockers in 24 hours, right? That's a big claim that is constantly made. Now, you wouldn't be in favor of that, right? Obviously, because you're saying this needs to be, teams of people need to be involved in this, and it shouldn't be like a willy-nilly decision.
Yeah. It should be methodical, careful. It should be carefully supervised. It should be, yes, very, very carefully supervised.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So if you're citing a clinic that didn't follow those kinds of procedures or standards or whatever, then I would have an issue with that. Yeah. I don't know if you're trying to make the case that this is like the pervasive way that it's done just broadly. I haven't seen evidence of that. If you showed me, so for example, like if you showed me, so we talked about how England and Sweden were pausing puberty blockers because they want to look at like long-term effects. Now, if they come back in 10 years and they say like, hey, look, we looked into this and it increases the risk of cancer by 5,000%, and it starts listing like all these like tangible, like serious risks, then I would be swayed. I'd be like, oh, okay. Like I just go wherever the data show. Like right now, I haven't seen any compelling data to demonstrate that puberty blockers is a substantial risk. I mean, it's like the same. Yeah.
So you looked for data that disproves your hypothesis.
I did, yeah. And the problem right now when it comes to puberty blockers is that we don't have a lot of like long-term data. That's one of the reasons why I believe the CAS report was suggesting to pause, because they wanted to compile data. And so right now, like we don't have conclusive proof that puberty blockers pose a significant risk to people. Now that could be the case. Like we could revisit this 10 years, and after they compile enough data, they can show this. But so far, I don't think anyone has seen such data.
Well, that is the issue that I have, is there isn't long-term data on, this sort of procedure of putting kids on puberty blockers and giving them cross-sex hormones in terms of like, what is the, not the desistance, but what is the regret rate from that cohort of people that hasn't been, we don't have the data on that. So I guess we'll have to see, 10 years down the road what that.
I thought we had it. I thought we do have data on when it comes to regret rate in terms of transitioning.
Not for, no, but we do for pre-puberty blocker, putting kids on puberty blockers and doing all that stuff. We don't have long-term data, obviously, because it's too new. We don't have long-term data on that cohort of children, on what their regrets rates are going to look like 10 years out.
I would have to look into this more, but I think
Okay.
How long have they been prescribing puberty blockers for gender transitioning? It's been decades, right?
No, I think it's only started like 2016, maybe 2015.
That would surprise me. How
It's
long
recent.
have
It is
they
more recent, yeah.
prescribing puberty blockers for trans kids? Since the 80s is what I'm seeing, for 3 decades.
That's not accurate. Yeah, that's not accurate.
Transgender adolescents have been using blockers for 3 decades, Wilson said. They have
It's not
also
accurate.
used
Okay.
They have also been used since the 1980s to treat children for whom puberty starts at an unusually early age to
Yeah,
allow
precocious puberty. Yeah,
right. But
that's a different issue.
okay. Well, a cursory
There's
Google
nothing-
search says they've been using it for gender affirming care.
I mean, that's a lie, or they use it in very limited circumstances, because I literally went to school in the 2000s and treatment was talked about, and puberty blockers were not in the normal treatment protocol in America. So I don't know what you're Googling, but
well, maybe it's become more.
Was 9/11 an inside job?
well, there you go. You're gonna find that.
Well, boys, I gotta
Inside
drive to Nevada,
job.
but hey,
Okay.
I enjoyed the
Oh, right
conversation.
here.